Production underwriting for Ruckus has been made possible in part by the generous contributions from Fred and Lou Hartwig and from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon, joined by the Ruckettes, Kansas City Star editorial writer Yael Abu-Hakka, Gwen Grant, president and CEO of the Kansas City Urban League, media and communications consultant Mary O'Halloran, and joining us this week, the head of the Kansas City Library System and host of KCPT's Meet the Past, Crosby Kemper. To counter critics who oppose making KCI a one-terminal airport, supporters have used enhanced security as a major rationale for change. But that argument is now harder to make. The regional director of the Transportation Security Administration says changing the configuration would not greatly improve security, and in fact, the current layout might even be safer. Kevin Koster, who founded SaveKCI.org, thinks this opinion takes security concerns out of play. Do you think it does, Gwen?
Well, it certainly takes the safety concerns out of play. But I think with security, there's also the issue of cost. And I think that's another point that the proponents of a new airport are trying to make, is that it would be more economical. We could benefit from economies of scale if we have one large security area. I frankly love the airport security system the way it is, and I hope that they will, I know that renovation is a necessity, but the more information we get about this, the more we find that, you hear the one argument that we want to, address security, we want to have more retail, but I don't think they're making a strong enough case for all of that, because I don't go to the airport to shop. I go to the airport to get on a plane and get out of town.
You said you love the airport. Did you see the quote from the head of the Regional Transportation Security Administration? He says, KCI screens 14,000 passengers a day. Average wait time at checkpoints is 10 minutes. Quote, you can tell why the citizens of this city love their airport.
Absolutely. You want to get in and get out.
But doesn't it seem counterintuitive that an airport that is 40-some years old, even though it's been retrofitted, would be more secure than a brand new facility built in the post-9/11 era?
Well, I hear what the guy said, the TSA guy said, is it's about the same, really. Yeah. And but the argument, all the arguments have been made by the proponents of the terminal turn out to be wrong under investigation.
No, it's not true.
Yes, it is true, Yael. I mean, you of course are one of these proponents, and you've used the TSA argument. Turns out to be wrong. Actually, the airlines aren't willing to pay for it. Turns out, they aren't willing to pay for it. It turns out that you mentioned in your editorial, one editorial, we ought to look at Indianapolis and Sacramento, so I did. And guess what? They spend over $1 billion on their terminals. Prices go up and the number of passengers goes down, which is true for the Cincinnati airport, the St. Louis airport, Milwaukee airport. Just tell me when you want me to stop.
Well,
okay, right
now. Look, yeah, Crosby's right. I'm a supporter of a newer airport, not necessarily a one-terminal airport. So just to be clear.
Okay, we're back.
Are you opposed to that? Are you opposed to renovations?
I think we should spend money to improve the front door,
and
aspect. That great argument is now the last argument to be made.
No, it's not. Actually, one of the things that people really have to get over is, well, if the security is, we just can't improve on the security. Well, no, actually, if you build a newer airport, you can have maybe as good a security as they have now. And yes, we spent more money, but now it's going to be good for the next 30 or 40 years. Same thing on this, this whole idea of having concessions, which, when is a typical, I don't go there to the shop. Well, as we just had a story in the Star, a lot of people do go to the airports to shop, and it is a money maker.
A lot of people shop in the airport.
That's not going to be the reason to do the airport. I understand
but shops in the airport, if they're successful, are a money maker for the city?
Not for the city, for the airport. You
Not
don't make
even
money
through
for the
taxes?
city.
For the aviation department.
But the cost
Aviation
of the new
department.
terminal completely obviates the increase in revenue from retail. I mean, we're talking about a $50 to $70 million gap from the current revenue generated by the airport, the revenue needed for $1.2 billion. And the restaurants will make up a tiny fraction of that.
You know, I want to go to the airport and have a really great barbecue, you know. Maybe once every 10 years. I mean, it really, Yale.
You've got to get out of town more, Mary.
But who goes there for that? But Yale, for example, the whole idea of the cost of security. Security is going to change as time goes on. You no doubt saw the article where the transportation security people are now training their agents to use different kinds of means to detect trouble. One of those is imitating the Israeli system, which used psychological training for its employees and so on. Now, that's not going to cost, that's not going to require building new, huge, different locations for us to go in. We need a new front door. We may not need any new kind of heavy-duty hardware for the new look at security.
Look, and one thing,
I feel
one thing
really
on this,
secure
you know, we're
there.
going down, and this is, I will agree to this point. We are a medium-sized airport, the 29 largest airports, and then the rest, and we're like 33rd, 34th usually on employments. They're the ones losing ground. Indianapolis, they're losing ground, not because of the airports necessarily, because all these airlines are consolidating at the major airports. So it almost might mean no matter what we do, we're going down, which means I don't know.
Here's another part of the fact.
We've got to move along. The comments about a front door refer to John Stevens of the Kansas City Convention and Visitors Association, who said KCI is not an effective front door for Kansas City for businesses coming to town. And he said some people describe it as dinky.
The airport is.
It is hard to predict elections, but here's a pretty safe bet. The next chairman of the Johnson County Commission will likely be named Ed. Commissioner Ed Peterson plans to challenge incumbent Commission Chairman Ed Eilert in this fall's election. And as we all know, two Eds are better than one. Peterson's announcement came at almost the same time that Eilert was presenting the State of the County address. Peterson claims the chairman defends a status quo that has reduced services to the taxpaying public. Eilert disputes that, adding he's not going to apologize for holding the line on taxes. Peterson is a former mayor of Fairway, Eilert a former mayor of Overland Park. But in a county often recognized for its high quality of life, Mary, what are these guys going to fight about?
Well, I think they're going to fight about the nature of the future. They're going to fight about what kind of future the county should have and what style of leadership suits that future best. The current style of leadership in Johnson County is interestingly enough, a very status quo. Everything is up to date. We're just fine here. We don't need much change. As a matter of fact, the less change, the better. We're still holding our own. We're still at the top of the list of all the counties in the metro and so on. And I think that what Ed Peterson is going to bring to this race, and what he already has begun to bring, is a sense of a new way of looking at that, returning to kind of the vision of the founders of the county, and that is that the strength of the county depends upon its infrastructure, schools, libraries, parks, schools again, roads,
let me stop you there for just a
public
second.
safety.
He says the status quo, is not acceptable, but Crosby, in Johnson County, the status quo seems to be reasonably low taxes that are consistent, and unemployment is low. Is the status quo so bad?
If you look at the combination of taxes at the local, the county, and the state level, Johnson County's got relatively high taxes. It's in the top third of.
But Johnson County doesn't control the tax rate for the state.
No, but it's in the top third of counties in the country in terms of property taxes, et cetera. So the real question shouldn't be the question of just raising or lowering taxes or raising or lowering services, but the way the taxes are structured.
Exactly.
Corporate welfare is huge in Johnson County. I mean, we're subsidizing Sprint,
and Johnson County's not alone in that.
Right, absolutely, it's a metro area problem, but Johnson County's in it as well as anybody. AMC, Applebee's, all these companies headquartered somewhere else.
Crosby of things that need to be fixed. Libraries. We have the
there's been a
person here that
cutback in
knows
library
about
services.
libraries.
Right.
Cut back on, there isn't any plan currently to expand libraries. Our parks right now, all the budget goes into maintenance. There's no plan to provide new park services or updated park services. We're not doing anything about the rural roads and public safety. There's a real battle going on about the cost of public safety. And finally, let me just say, I was at the Ritz-Carlton with you, Yale. And when he talked about the future, he never mentioned doing battle with Topeka. You know, little matter of, for example, taking away the tax on the fee on mortgage registration, $17 million whack. He never mentioned that.
Yale, you've talked about Johnson County in some recent columns. You've pointed out the aging infrastructure, increasing number of students who get free or reduced expense lunches, and you talk about the cost associated with economic development projects, public costs, which Crosby referred to. What else is a problem? What else is wrong?
Oh, well, I mean, the two things that Ed has mentioned before have been
Ed
Peterson.
Oh, okay.
Have been libraries and parks. Now, what are you going to do about them? And Crosby's also right. Well, you're going to raise taxes to do it, and Ed Peterson has not really said that. Yeah, the county's doing well. Could it do better if it went back to, as Mary said, the more progressive roots of the county? Possibly. But as Kevin Yoder has pointed out to me several times when I say it needs to be more progressive, hey, we've turned conservative here in Johnson County. You know, we like to keep our money, except unless we're giving it to AMC or some of these corporate welfare that Crosby mentioned. I am looking forward to the campaign because it will really force Peterson to put ideas on the table of here's how we're going to change. Yep. And it may force Eilert to say, well, you know, maybe we should try to take care of some of these, the people who aren't doing as well, which he did not really do a good job of mentioning last week in the State of the County.
Hasn't Peterson been on the county commission for quite a while,
Well,
10 years, and is he not the vice chairman now?
Well, yeah, I mean, he has a lot of experience.
The question, is he not part of the status quo, and what brought the status quo about?
That's why I'm saying the campaign is going to be interesting to see what his ideas are.
I know. I said that in the introduction.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to his introduction.
Yes, I said in the introduction.
It needed repetition.
I said Peterson is a former mayor of Fairway, and Eilert is a former long-term mayor of Overland Park. Thank you. The Kansas City, Missouri City Council continues to move at high speed, clearing the road for expansion of the yet unbuilt downtown streetcar system. The $500 million plan would extend the line by 8 miles and include Independence Avenue to Benton Boulevard, Linwood to Prospect, and Main south to UMKC. The Show Me Institute is no fan of the city's venture and suggests $500 million would be much better spent on massively expanding bus service. And the free market-oriented think tank, co-founded by our guest panelist, also has some doubts about the city's projections for streetcar ridership. So, Yale, do you share Show Me Institute's concerns?
Yes, some of them I do. I share the concern about cost. I mean, the cost is very high. I actually share the concern about what the cost is to a limited geographical area, which is more or less the east side of Kansas City, and then going to the plaza to pay for it. And I finally share the concern about the cost to individual property owners who are within a third of the mile of the streetcar. I'm not so much in the camp of, oh, we're just spend more money on buses. Holy cow. We already have 7/8 of a cent going for a bus system. And there is a difference between a bus and a streetcar. And a lot of proponents and supporters
what
make
is
that
the,
difference.
I mean, other than appearance, what is the difference?
Rail. You're going to have that thing there for the next 20 or 30 years. Whereas a bus system, tomorrow I go, I'm not going down Broadway anymore, I'm going over to Maine.
Well,
crap, I put my office here on Broadway.
But isn't that an advantage?
So it's an advantage of streetcar, yes.
No, of buses.
No, it's an advantage of streetcar because
they can turn around.
When you ask what's the advantage of streetcar to develop,
other than
that's
appearance.
what I'm telling you.
Okay.
But I do think, I mean, this election, if it does get in the ballot, is going to hinge on whether the cost can be paid for by the federal government with half the money coming from the feds, and whether there's really a belief that this could help the east side, which is going along Linwood and going along Independence Avenue. And so if it does that, and if they can prove that, and they have not done that yet, that would be an idea of proving. I think it's going to be a tough election. I think it's going to be a tough election.
The problem with all this is there are facts out there that the fact-free city could find out. Atlanta did this. You don't move development. You don't move development. St. Louis Fed has studied this. Berkeley economists have studied this. There's a tiny movement of location of development, but you don't create development. So the economic development is wrong. Second, we're the least dense city of any city that's tried this. Our the ridership numbers are wrong, and there's no reason for people. And the last but most important point is it's going to be paid for by sales tax, which is a tax on the working poor, and it's going to subsidize shoppers and tourists who are the people who ride fixed rail.
And also a property tax.
And a property.
Residents within a third of a mile.
We're already a high-tax city. Our cost of living is already at the national
average. Let me do
average.
this. According to the Show Me Institute, the extensions of the downtown streetcar line would attract anywhere from 13,700 to 23,200 every day. And then the Show Me Institute, and I quote, says, the high-end estimate would make it the most successful streetcar line in America according to ridership. It would have more riders than Seattle, the busiest streetcar line in America, which is only a mile long and is right in the heart of downtown Seattle. Do they really think that is going to happen?
Seattle has light rail, too.
What do you think?
Well, I think it's the ridership issue is a tough one, and I agree with Crosby just about everything he said about the cost of this. As much as I, want us to have light rail and a better mass transit system, I think that the hard sell is going to be how do we finance that, and they're not making a strong enough case for the east side. And I when you listen to
what do you mean by that?
In terms of just how much difference is that going to make to have this rail come just Linwood to
positive differences?
How much positive difference, and weighing that against the cost, and then how much everyone has to pay for this and not have access to it, and the issue about the buses. Now, they've had to cut routes because of lack of funding, and what we really need to be looking at is if we're going to make a huge investment like this, how much of that should be invested in buses that get people to work, as opposed to, yes, light rail is great for tourism, it's great, we think, for economic development, but there are much more important issues that
we're a long way from anything being done, right, Mary?
It appears that way. I'm really very surprised that the very capable people who got this all going in the first place, who have overcome all, well, they're there. They passed the election. They did get it begun, let's put it that way.
With 300
and
votes,
I'm very surprised that they haven't come up with the package to do exactly what you just talked about. I'm not sure why that is. I think it maybe goes back to the beginning and the way it was financed to start with. If the whole city isn't engaged in doing something for the whole city,
and they won't do that because the whole city
people
would
start
vote
to
against
break
it.
up into factions.
Seven times
and then
done.
the bundling of the tax. I mean, I think that's going to be a problem. I mean, you're bundling the light rail with the bus, and that's just
and
not
making
good.
assumptions about
so
the federal
we have
government.
to lose on one side.
Now you've got factions. Now you've got Brookside
and you
versus
still have a $30 million gap, even with all the positive assumptions.
Apparently, Brookside and Waldo want no part of all this.
Fact-free city.
All right, this may sound like an oxymoron, the Republican-Jewish coalition, but it does exist, and it met last weekend in Las Vegas, and on display 3 prominent GOP governors, Scott Walker, John Kasich, and Chris Christie, all thought to be considering a run for the White House and hoping to get the financial backing of billionaire Sheldon Adelson and others. Meantime, the Washington Post reports that many of the Republican Party's most powerful insiders and financiers have begun a behind-the-scenes campaign to draft former Florida Governor Jeb Bush into the 2016 presidential race. What do you think about Bush as the party's nominee, Crosby?
Well, Mike, Jeb and I played on the Andover JV tennis team together, so I look at this as validation of my mentoring of Jeb. But I got to say, it's sort of like with Hillary Clinton in the race on the Democratic side, it looks like a choice between royal families, or because it's America, maybe brands. I think the Republican Party's got a deeper bench than that with some of those folks you mentioned, and Marco Rubio and Rob Portman and a lot of other interesting candidates, and I hope we don't just stick with the 2 royal families, the Clintons and the Bushes.
What about Rand Paul and Ted Cruz?
And Rand Paul's got a lot to say and generates some excitement.
That's a good line.
He has a lot to say. He's not the crazy member of the family. That's his father.
That's true.
And Ted Cruz has got to come back from his monomania about shutting down the government before I think he's a serious candidate even inside the Republican Party, where we occasionally do want to shut down the government. But
Crosby, aren't you just a little shocked by just the scene of all these guys going out and kneeling before Sheldon Adelson, this casino
Yeah.
capitalist who last time
it'd be
spent
much better to
$90
do what
million.
Democrat candidates do in Hollywood or Goldman Sachs. Yeah, you're right, Mary.
Oh, but there's something sort of shameful
So
about it.
will you give up Goldman Sachs in Hollywood for your candidates?
You'll give up.
Yeah, I'll give up Sheldon Adelson. You bet.
But I
I'll
don't
give
know,
up Las Vegas.
How
you
was
bet.
Jeb on the Andover? Was it tennis?
He was a little better than I was. More time in the sun.
See, there you go.
Yeah.
All in all, it was a net benefit to deal with him.
He's a good guy. He's a very good guy.
Why
He'd be a good president.
You point out that Republicans may be leery of somebody named Bush, but yet these financiers and insiders apparently are making a serious effort to recruit him.
It's a brand thing.
Why?
And the Bush brand is going up as the Clinton and Obama brand is going down. Of course, that changes every 4 to 8 years. I think we get mixed up with things from the past if it's Jeb or if it's Hillary. I'm perfectly happy that it's going to be Hillary on the Democratic side because I think that brings up the failures of the last 5 years and maybe some others.
Well, sitting there last week, Republican attorney Steve Marakian said if Hillary Clinton is the nominee of the Democratic Party, she'd win. There was no way she could be stopped. I take it you don't agree with that assessment.
I think that's completely wrong. And I think our failed foreign policy, we have a huge problem in our foreign policy, and I think she has to take some credit for that. And she's walked away from it. You notice she hasn't been commenting much on foreign policy lately.
Yeah,
former Secretary of
She's not
State.
running for president.
She's not right now.
As a former Secretary of State, wouldn't you expect her to be?
I know.
Actually, she took out after
God.
Putin with too strong a language. Is what she did. That's one of the reasons.
I think she's run away from our current foreign policy, which is
She's just
her.
getting ready to run. She's not saying a whole lot about anything right now, Crosby. She's getting ready to run. And what you all have to deal with is the gender gap. I mean, your policies just turn women totally off, and she's going to carry women, and women are going to carry her into the White House.
You mean women
if
who
she
agree
runs.
with you?
No, women just no,
When Walter Mondale tried that in 1984 and put Geraldine Ferraro on the ticket as vice president, Ronald Reagan won the female vote. Now, Yale, I want to ask Yale a question.
Wake up here.
Tea Party, factor still in the Republican Party, and especially in presidential politics?
Oh, sure, could be. I mean, George Will's column, I think, of this morning talked about, and he was kind of pro-Bush, Jeb.
Yeah.
And he was talking about, well, we don't want to let these crazy Tea Partiers, get us off track here. But, well, sure, there is that aspect where you have the party fighting, but you're going to have some of that in the Democratic too. And I do, and as I said last week, I really hope it's not Hillary Clinton because I am tired of the royal family. That's why I hope it's not Jeb Bush. I'm tired of the royal family. There have to be other people out there with other ideas who have experience who can lead our country. I mean, there just have to be. But if it's, I will be interested. We have 3 more years here, folks. I mean, it's 2.5 more years here. And a lot can happen. A lot, Hillary might not run, believe it or not, when, And so
Bill Clinton last night on Late Night TV was excellent. And trust me,
Clinton.
Bill Clinton was
He's an old guy hopping around now. Come on.
With Jimmy Kimmel. He was fabulous.
All right.
He would be an excellent fight.
Now it is time for Roast and Toast, where the Rockettes say hurrah or bah to people and events in the news. Up first this week is Gwen.
Well, I'm going to say bye to the Kansas Senate for approving a bill that will prevent cities and counties from regulating firearms. In a time when we need more gun regulation, when we need to create safer communities, we shouldn't be deregulating. We should be having more regulation and more gun control.
I want to be the first person in the history of the United States to say something nice about the TSA. The TSA and the airlines have brought our fact-free city back from Fantasyland, from the Emerald City of Oz, into reality with their comments about the airport.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to praise the Missouri legislators when it comes to guns. I mean, these gun-happy guys, they finally realized that, well, they can't pass a gun nullification bill allowing local people to arrest federal agents for enforcing federal laws. So they took that out of the bill, and they're still going to go ahead and pass their stupid little measure, but at least they recognize you can't go around the state of Missouri arresting federal agents.
Well, this is really, burnt toast. I mean, this is a roast, as usual, of the state of Kansas's legislature and its governor. Guess what? It's coming more and more to the fore in the last few weeks that as Sam Brownback's massive tax cuts on income tax are understood by people, guess what? As you lower the income tax on people, the amount of federal income tax increases. So about 25% of the so-called savings in tax is going back to the federal government at a time when the state is turning down federal assistance for expansion of Medicaid. It's unconscionable.
And finally, here is a toast to Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican, Michigan, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. He is leaving government at the end of this year to work in a far nobler profession. He's going to become a syndicated radio talk show host. And heaven knows that with only Rush, Sean, Mark, Laura, Monica, and Michael available, America suffers from a severe shortage of syndicated conservative talk programming. Rogers will work for Cumulus, a major radio company with 7 stations in Kansas City, including KCMO, AM, and FM. And that is Ruckus for this week. We're back next Thursday at 7:30. And now on behalf of the Ruckettes and the Ruckus crew, Mike Shannon saying thanks for watching. Thanks, Crosby, for coming in. Come back soon. And good night.